So 18 million mobile-only visitors, which is the same as the entire traffic of Forbes 5 years ago. Right? That's pretty significant. Can you talk a little bit about how you've done that on the mobile front?
Yeah, so this really is part of a 5-year journey that we've been on. And like many media companies coming out of the global recession, we were really challenged with thinking about how our business was going to be able to survive in this new economy. And one of the things that became very clear was that the economics of journalism were broken, and that the models that had been created of how you had reporters and copywriters and fact checkers and editors, and the whole process was very time intensive, and it did not work with the new digital model that had been created. Not to mention, these were the early days of really social becoming a viable medium for marketers. We had ad networks, exchanges were on the horizon, and so the business side was going through a lot of transformation and pressures as well. And so we actually bought a startup called TrueSlant, and the model behind TrueSlant was bring great, talented journalists together, give them the tools to be able to publish, and let them all connect with each other and build audiences by connecting with each other's brands. And so we've been on this journey where we're now up to over 1,500 topic experts who are publishing on our platform. We've built, instead of infrastructure around how the content's created, we built infrastructure around how we audit and vet the content creators. And so each one of those people really does represent a grassroots marketing operation in and of themselves. So they go out into social platforms, they go out into different communities around the web, and they position themselves in the content that they've published on Forbes as being an authoritative voice. And so we've had sort of this dual-prong approach of creating a content engine where we publish between 300 and 400 original pieces a day. And by doing that over several years, it's created a tremendous amount of SEO juice for our content. And so while you've got this grassroots 1,500 contributors going out into the social web and distributing their content and building audience, and by the way, they're all compensated on building loyalty on their audience, not by generating page views, we also have this tremendous SEO engine working. And today we find over 60% of our traffic is actually coming from search.
So how do you compensate on loyalty?
Yeah.
So you've got these contributors. They've got a great platform internally, right? They're incentivized to share. When you say loyalty, so that means not doing clickbait articles.
Right.
I mean, what exactly is it in terms of loyalty?
So we recognize that people who write about healthcare are probably going to be less likely to drive 1 million pages to a post than people who write about Facebook or Apple.
Right.
And what's important to us, being Forbes, is that we always have to make sure that the quality of our content speaks to the various audiences that we're serving. And so we've built an incentive plan where they get incented a very, very small amount for the first visit that anybody makes to their content. But they get 5x that for a repeat visit and 10x that for the third visit and onward up, so that it becomes more valuable to them to get the same person there 5 or 6 times in a month, creating that sense of loyalty, than to drive 20 times more people there one time.
Okay. How do you think about sourcing, right? So it sounds like it's built internally. You've emphasized the WordPress underpinnings of this home-built solution. Sounds very internally focused, but if you think about it, and I'm thinking in part for the audience, when you're thinking about attribution of sources, it sounds like, and I laid out this thesis this morning, where more complex businesses that aren't mobile-only are looking to get traffic from everywhere. But it sounds like SEO. It sounds like it's a Google play. Would you agree with that, or is it? In terms of traffic acquisition?
Yeah, it certainly turned out to be that way.
Yeah.
A lot of emphasis for many publishers is, of course, how can they milk Facebook and the other social platforms. For us, it's not insignificant. It's very important, but it's not the primary source. And we recognize that the algorithms change all the time, but we believe that we've built a credible medium here in terms of how the content's being created. It's on brand for us, and the volume that we put out really is the fuel here that's right. Driving all of that.
So kind of like what LinkedIn is to Facebook, you guys are to BuzzFeed or something like that. I mean, Google traffic as opposed to Facebook or social
Right.
traffic as well.
Exactly.
So, I mean, and you're a private company. Can you give us a sense of what the revenue side is? I mean, you're probably going to say no comment, but in terms of rough size of the revenue of the company?
Yeah, so no comment.
Yeah.
But what I can tell you is that we are what a lot of people refer to as a legacy media company.
Right.
Came from print. Most people probably know us for a magazine. This year will be over 70% of our revenue will be digital. We made that switch about 2 years ago. And of that, I think the important figure, especially for the context of this conference, is that we, like many other publishers, are hovering right around that 10% of our digital revenue coming from mobile, which I can also break down a little bit more detail if.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, so I think we're all very familiar with the Mary Meeker chart around time spent and revenues. A lot of my competitors are on record talking about 50% of their traffic is mobile, 10% of the revenue. I think that the one part of the equation that isn't talked about a lot is that the mobile revenue, so we're 50% as well, 10% tablets, 40% smartphone, and 50% desktop. The mobile revenue, while only 10%, it only represents about 20 to 25% of our actual monetizable inventory. And so what I mean by that is a desktop experience is usually somebody going deeper into the site. The pages usually have more ads per page. And so while it's definitely this big monumental change in terms of the volume of traffic, it's still only about 20 to 25% of the monetizable inventory. So while we are certainly concerned and we need to close that gap from a business perspective, we're not quite as panicked as perhaps everybody else would believe.
Sounds like you're seeing it closing over time, right? So this isn't a permanent problem with mobile monetization in your view?
Absolutely not. And in fact, I got here this morning and I walked around the room on the other side of that wall, and just seeing some of the exhibitors gives me great faith. And we're in the works of talking to a couple of them. Some of the things that they're doing are fantastic, and I know that the brands that we've been talking to, if we really think about the mobile monetization delta, the big difference is that there isn't a demand source for brand building type inventory on mobile that there is on the desktop. We're certainly all very familiar with the massive businesses that app installs represent, and Facebook and Google's success in the early days. But for a publisher, a content owner, people who are ad-supported businesses, the demand for the brand building type of ads isn't there like it is on the desktop. But clearly, when you see what so many of these companies are going to be able to be offering here very quickly in a mobile web environment, which I think is important. Certainly, the app environment has afforded everybody the ability to do a little bit more dynamic work. But the mobile web had been very limiting up until this point. But lots of breakthroughs coming right now.
You mentioned some of the companies you've seen. Any specific companies that you think are doing interesting things?
Well, without playing favorites to your sponsors, certainly the ad tile work is really spectacular. I think what they've been able to do, mobile web, is really great, and we're definitely taking a good look at them. I met with somebody from NovoRoll earlier today. What they're doing with video in mobile web, I think, is really spectacular. So big breakthroughs that are coming. In fact, they're already here. And it's just a function of being out and marketers really starting to embrace these forms of creative assets.
Yeah, no, I agree. Ad tile technology is pretty cool. It's apparently only 20 employees. It's interesting. But mobile video, you mentioned. That's hot. What is your mobile video play? Or did you have one, or how's that developed?
Yeah, it's in full disclosure, it's early stages, and it's not something that's fully baked at this point. I think there's absolutely an appetite for digital video. Certainly on the desktop, sold out through the end of the year. And there's really no organic way for us to manufacture anymore, which is very painful to say as the CRO. Certainly is a challenge. But I think some of the things that I've seen here are certainly going to break through. And Facebook is writing the rules in terms of what we'll all accept as a view and something that's able to be charged for, and what's a viewable impression. And since they're making the market, I think that there's a lot of opportunity for the rest of us to be able to benefit, because that while they represent tremendous scale and great opportunity, brands do want to also be associated with certain environments, and it's not always going to be the end-all be-all to be on Facebook.
Now, you mentioned the 50% of your traffic is mobile. But you said, I think, something like 65% of that is from millennials?
Yeah.
Which is so 35 or under, right? Is that
35 or
that
under,
definition?
correct. Yep.
So, and that's interesting. Would you say that's surprising for you as a brand, for legacy brand, is considered fairly focused on business and some of these tech trends? Can you talk a little bit about that and what you're doing to engage those folks?
Yeah, so that was a little bit of a shocking statistic for us, and certainly I would imagine for the rest of you. People don't necessarily think Forbes millennials. But real quickly, has anybody here heard of our 30 under 30 list? That's a lot of hands. So clearly you see that this list that's now 4 years old, identifying the millennial elites or uber millennials, those who are starting businesses, really driving change in the world. These people have tremendous social influence, and when you talk about influencing the influencers, this is that group. And so we're 4 years in the process of developing that list. We held an event last year. It was the inaugural Under 30 Summit. We had 1,500 of these individuals attend. And in the course of the 3 days that we got together, the social footprint of the activity that they all had by distributing content from the summit had total impressions, a total of over 1.2 billion social impressions. And so you start to think about the compounding effect of 4 years of the list, the influence and the networks that each of these individuals represent. And then you start to see that all of a sudden, between that and some of our content strategy behind a lot of the career content that we publish, a lot of the content we publish around entrepreneurship. The one thing Forbes has always stood for, we're 98 years old, but we've always been about entrepreneurial capitalism. And we live in a world today that the business world is driven by entrepreneurial capitalists. And so much of that happens here, locally in the Valley, but it's no longer just a Valley thing. And it's not only something that is restricted to technology either. Our editor talks a lot about with the Under 30 franchise that in the history of business, it was always a disadvantage to be young. And those who had experience, networks, access to capital were the people that thrived in business. Today, it's the inverse. It's the knowledge of the technology. It's the understanding of how crowdfunding and social media amplification and cloud computing all work that gives somebody a leg up in starting and building a business. And these are the people who do it. So our brand is really on point for where the business world is today. Our franchise, the 30 Under 30, has really been a smashing success. And a lot of the content that we put out around career development just fuels all of this. And all of that has equated to exactly what you said. 2/3 of our mobile audience is under the age of 35, and 80% of our mobile audience is under the age of 45. So that represents definitely a new audience for us, and to the point of 18, 19 million unique visitors coming to us on a mobile device. About 15 or 16 million of them don't ever come to the desktop. So a completely new audience for us.
Yeah, thanks. So you talked about this realization when we were preparing for this. It's about 6 months ago, where you came to understand that there's 3 distinct experiences. Can you talk a little bit about what was so profound about that realization? Because you dwelled on it a little bit, and talk about the device report sheet that you have.
Yeah, about 6 months ago, the woman who heads our digital ad products called a meeting, and I was there, our chief product officer was there, and our SVP of product was there. And she laid out on the screen that, in fact, Forbes digitally is actually 3 audiences. We've got a desktop audience, which has a very specific demographics and different behavior in terms of the content that they're consuming and their affinity graphs. Our smartphone audience is this more millennial audience, and the behavior that they that they show on the site is very different in terms of consumption time and their experiences. And then the tablet audience is another thing altogether, which is really much more of a evening, late into the evening and weekends experience, and it skews significantly older. It's really that other side. It's that 45-plus audience that's coming to tablet. They read our luxury content. They read our retirement, more of that financial planning information. So we actually, as it turns out, have 3 very different and distinctive audiences coming to us through the different devices.
That's interesting. And so that there's, are you saying that there's very little overlap between the 3 or relative to other businesses?
Yeah.
And how do you know that? I mean, in terms, I mean, people aren't logging in per se, but you know this through media networks. I mean, can you talk a little bit about the site traffic analytics and so on?
Yeah.
How you know that?
So the majority of that information comes out of Google Analytics.
Yeah.
That just based off of being a pretty much end-to-end Google customer, we have all of that data flowing through GA. And the ability to isolate devices or content or author is something where we built a whole data and analytics team to specifically sit there and mine all the fantastic data that we get. We also have Facebook overlaid on the site and have the ability to then look at the audiences compared to the Facebook audience. And one of the things, of course, as we go through this whole process, our CEO, our CFO always says, well, what is all of this mobile traffic doing? Is it diluting the audiences that people think of for us, that our marketers are thinking of? And we use actually the Facebook data to compare to their general overall averages and indexes, and you continue to see an over-index in all the affluence scores, on the corporate scores. And so you have the ability to put all that together to really provide this type of rich analytics.
Got it. What is your login registration policy on the site?
We have none. So it's a totally free site. You have to log in if you're going to comment. We do have some following tools, so if you want to follow an author, or follow a comment, some of the comments, you would have to log in for that. You can use a social login or create an account, but the majority of the people who come to the site are actually coming and never registering, no paywalls, and are consuming an ad-supported website.
Right, got it. You talked about an acquisition that you made that may get back to the influencer category. Can you talk? Are you free to talk a little bit about that? Yeah.
So about 3 or 4 months ago, we just acquired a company called Camerama, which is an app developer, and basically created a fancy way for you to manipulate images. But it was really an acqui-hire where the founder of the company and the developers were doing some amazing things in the app that we hadn't seen before. And so while the web experience and the mobile web experience have always been the focus, we are launching in October at the 2nd annual Under 30 Summit an Under 30 app. And the idea there is because we're a content company, we don't provide necessarily a utility for people. We are going to keep it as a closed, invitation-only, must be a list member or attendee of the summit to be able to gain access to the actual platform. And we're doing a number of things in terms of social meetups around the country. We're throwing a beta launch party in New York and one in San Francisco later this summer to get them on the platform and really get them all to feel like they're connected to it, that they have a sense of ownership over it, and that they're a part of this thing. And so it's our first foray into that arena. But for us, it's not necessarily out of the gate about a monetization plan. It's about we've got this tremendous audience that is representative of what our brand is today. And for us to provide an experience where they wear their under 30 list member badge of honor and credibility, and it's up on their websites, and it's something that they use to get venture funding and create networks, we're going to bring that all together for them. And we think it's very much on point for us and a great foray into how to leverage a new type of platform for us.
Great. Mark, it looks like we're out of time. Thank you very much for your time and joining us. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you.